The snow was falling hard. The wind screamed across the white planet, covering everything in ice and silence. Out in the frozen wasteland, there was no life, only cold and darkness. Mark, a human supply scout, was finishing his daily check. He lived alone in a small outpost on planet Virex 7. The sky here was always gray, the land always frozen. His job was boring but simple. Watch the weather, monitor the signal tower, and send reports to command once a day. He was just about to close the door when he heard it. A sound. Very faint. A cry. Mark stopped. His hand froze on the metal door. He listened. There it was again. A tiny, weak voice carried by the wind. He grabbed his coat, gloves, and thermal scanner and stepped outside. "Is someone out there?" He shouted. Only the storm replied. Still, he moved forward, flashlight in one hand, scanner in the other. 10 steps. 20. Then he saw something, just a small shape in the snow. He ran. When he reached the figure, his heart sank. It was a child, and alien child. The small boy was curled up in the snow, shaking, arms wrapped around his chest. His skin was light blue, his ears long and pointed. He wore no coat. His feet were bare, his tiny nose was red from the cold, and frost clung to his eyelashes. "Oh no," Mark whispered. "You're freezing." He didn't think. He just acted. He scooped the child into his arms. The boy was so light it felt like carrying a feather. Mark turned and ran back through the storm, snow hitting his face like knives. Inside the outpost, he kicked the door shut and set the child on the heated floor. He grabbed every blanket he had, wrapped them around the boy, and turned the heat up to full power. "Stay with me, kid," he said. "You're gonna be all right." The boy didn't answer. He just shivered harder. Mark made hot water, soaked a towel, and gently cleaned the boy's face. Then he fed him drops of warm soup, 1 spoon at a time. Slowly, the shivering slowed. The boy opened his eyes, big, black, and filled with fear. Mark knelt down. "You're safe now." The boy blinked. Still no words. Mark sighed. "Okay, no talking. That's fine." He pulled a chair close to the heater and sat beside the bundle of blankets. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, silence filled the room. Mark stared at the child. Where did he come from? Why was he alone? And who would leave a kid out in a storm like that? He looked again at the boy's feet, blistered, cracked, and bleeding. There were marks on his wrists, too. Faint but real, like rope or chains. Mark's jaw clenched. This wasn't an accident, he muttered. The boy made a tiny noise, a whimper. Mark softened his voice. "Don't worry, no one's gonna hurt you here." The boy reached out and grabbed Mark's sleeve, just held it. Tight. Mark didn't move. He let the child hold on until sleep finally pulled him into warmth. An hour later, as Mark stood by the window sipping hot tea, something flickered on the radar screen. Movement. He turned to the monitor and saw it. A figure far out in the snow. Then another. Someone was out there. Circling the outpost. Mark narrowed his eyes. Whoever left that child in the storm had just come back. The boy didn't talk. Not when Mark gave him food. Not when he changed the bandages on his feet. Not even when the storm ended, and soft sunlight filled the small outpost. He just sat there, wrapped in thick blankets, eyes watching everything, but mouth sealed shut. Mark didn't push him. He just kept the room warm, the food ready, and his voice gentle. "You don't have to say anything," Mark said one morning, kneeling beside him. "But you're safe now, you hear me? No one's going to hurt you here." The boy blinked, then looked down at the floor. Mark checked the radar again. No new movement, but he couldn't forget the shadow he saw last night. The figure outside, in the storm. He had grabbed his blaster that night and scanned the area, but found nothing. No tracks, no heat signal. Like it vanished into the wind. He didn't like it. Someone was watching. That afternoon, Mark tried something new. He sat across from the boy at the table and placed a small drawing pad and pen in front of him. Here. Try drawing, if you don't want to speak. The boy looked at the pen like it was a weapon. His hand trembled. But slowly, he picked it up. Then he began to draw. Small lines. A figure. Another. A large, dark shape. Red eyes. Claws. Mark leaned forward. Is this you? The boy nodded once. And this? Mark pointed to the large creature. The boy stared at it. Then pointed to the wall. Mark turned. His breath caught in his throat. The boy had drawn the exact shape that Mark had seen outside in the storm. The tall shadow. The red eyes. Mark stood up. His hand reached for the emergency locker. He checked the blaster. Fully charged. He looked back at the boy. Is that thing looking for you? The boy didn't nod, but his tiny hand clenched the blanket tighter. That was enough. Later that night, when the boy finally fell asleep, Mark turned on his personal log recorder and spoke quietly. Day 3. Found child still silent, but responsive. Seems afraid of something out there. Drew a creature I've never seen before, tall, clawed, with glowing red eyes. Same as the one near the outpost 2 nights ago. No contact since then, but I've increased motion scans. He paused, then added, I don't know who hurt this kid, but I swear, I won't let them take him again. He shut off the recorder and sighed. This was no longer a rescue. It was a fight. Just before midnight, Mark woke up to a noise. Not the wind, not the heater, a scrape, like claws against metal. He grabbed his blaster and moved quietly to the window. Nothing. Then, a flash of red eyes. Gone in a blink. Mark whispered to himself, Whatever you are, you're getting closer. He turned to check on the boy, still asleep, breathing soft, one small hand clutching the sleeve of Mark's jacket. Mark sat beside him, gun ready, eyes open. He would not let that creature take another step inside. The next morning, the boy opened his eyes and whispered, One word, run. Mark leaned forward. What? The boy looked up at him, terrified. They're coming. Mark's blood ran cold. They? The boy nodded. Mark stood fast, ran to the radar and saw it. Not 1, not 2, but 6 signals, all moving toward the outpost. Fast. Mark grabbed his gear, packed supplies, and looked the boy in the eyes. We're not running, he said. We're surviving. Mark woke up before the sun. The sky outside was still dark, but his gut told him something was wrong. He reached for his blaster and moved to the door of the outpost. The wind had calmed, but snow still covered the ground. Then he saw it. Tracks. Deep, heavy, sharp. Something with claws had walked around the outpost in the night more than once. Circles, lines, scrapes. Mark knelt beside the prints. These are fresh. He followed them around the building and froze. On the side wall, scratched into the metal, was a symbol, ugly and strange. It looked like an eye with spikes through it. It wasn't random. It was a warning, or a mark. Mark went back inside and locked every bolt on the door. The boy sat at the table, his eyes wide. Mark put a warm drink in front of him. You were right. Something's out there. The boy didn't drink. He just stared at the window. Mark sat across from him. What do they want from you? Silence. Then the boy reached for the drawing pad again. He drew 3 circles. Then a cordon himself inside it. Mark leaned forward. They kept you in a cage? The boy nodded. Mark clenched his jaw. Why? This time the boy drew a face, angry, cruel, with wires coming out of its head. Then he drew fire. Then a broken heart. Mark looked at the pictures. They hurt you? The boy's lip trembled. Mark said nothing. He just reached out and gently took the boy's hand. You're safe here, he said again. I promise. That afternoon, Mark checked the motion sensors again. More signs. The creatures, or whatever they were getting closer, but they never attacked. They just circled, watched, waited. It felt like a game, like they were trying to scare him. Mark wasn't scared. He was angry. That night, Mark set traps, laser tripwires, pulse mines, even set up his emergency distress beacon, though he knew help wouldn't come quickly. Virex 7 was far from any human colony. He went back inside, made dinner, and sat beside the boy. The child had drawn something new, a small cabin, with smoke rising, a human, a child, and a creature with wings far away. Mark looked at it. "Is that me?" The boy nodded. "And that's you?" The boy pointed at the smaller figure. "And this?" The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Hunter." It was the first time Mark heard his voice clearly, soft, afraid, but real. Hours later, long after the boy had gone to sleep, Mark stood near the window with his blaster in hand. He didn't rest. He couldn't. Suddenly, one of the traps went off. "Ziz-it, pop!" Mark ran to the screen. One red signal had blinked out. He smiled. "Got one of you." But then 4 more appeared on the radar. Closer. He looked at the screen. They were forming a circle around the outpost. Mark whispered to himself, "What are you waiting for?" Then something new happened. The child sat up in bed. His eyes were glowing. Soft, blue. Mark stepped back. Hey, are you okay?" The boy opened his mouth, but his voice wasn't just his. It echoed, like there were many voices inside him. "They are here for me." Mark's hand gripped the blaster. "Why?" The boy looked at him with glowing eyes. "Because I'm not supposed to exist." And then, every motion sensor around the outpost went dead, one by one. Click, click, click. Total silence. Darkness. Then, a heavy thud on the roof. Mark grabbed the boy, pulled him close, and whispered, "We're getting out of here." The knock on the door didn't sound like a knock. It was heavy, rhythmic, authoritative, like a command. Mark stood completely still, holding the boy behind him. The child's tiny fingers clutched his jacket tightly. The snow outside had stopped, falling. But trouble had just arrived. Mark moved to the monitor. A tall figure stood outside the outpost wearing a polished black uniform. His shoulders were broad, his skin a pale silver, and on his chest an insignia glowing red. The Imperial Bio-Authority. Not a military man. Worse, a scientist. Mark pressed the intercom. "State your business." The man looked up. His face was calm, too calm. "I am Director Kale. I'm here to collect stolen property." Mark narrowed his eyes. "This is a civilian outpost. No one's stealing anything here." Kale didn't blink. "We tracked the signal of Prototype 7 Gamma. You have him. Turn him over now." Mark glanced back at the boy. He was shaking, eyes wide with terror. "His name is Rin," Mark said. "And he's not property." Kale tilted his head. "He was never meant to leave the lab. He's dangerous. His existence is a breach of code. He's a child." "He is a weapon with a face," Kyle said coldly. "Built to burn." Mark gritted his teeth. "He was left to die." Kyle smiled faintly. "Because he failed to obey. That makes him defective. Turn him over or we will take him." Mark stepped back and grabbed his rifle. Kale's voice grew sharp. "You are protecting state material. That is treason." Mark shut off the intercom. He looked at Rin. "We leave now." Mark moved fast. Emergency pack, thermal suits, energy bars, extra power cells. He placed a small comm device in Rin's pocket. "You stay close. If we get separated, follow the blue light." The boy nodded, but tears formed in his eyes. "They always find me." Mark knelt. "They'll have to go through me first." As they stepped outside, cold wind hit their faces. A sleek black ship hovered in the distance, and Kale was no longer alone. Soldiers in biosuits scanned the area with glowing visors. Drones flew above, scanning for heat signals. Mark and Rin moved behind the rocks, stepping through untouched snow. Every sound felt louder. Every second felt like a countdown. They reached the ice ridge. Mark turned back and froze. One of the drones had spotted them. A red beam flashed. Alarms blared. Mark shouted, "Run!" Rin ran as fast as his small legs could go. Shots fired. Snow exploded near their feet. Mark returned fire, hit one drone, then another. But more kept coming. They reached a narrow cave entrance just big enough for them to crawl through. Inside it was dark and wet. Mark lit a small lantern and sat down, catching his breath. Rin was silent. Too silent. Mark turned to him. "You okay?" The boy looked up. His eyes were glowing again. Blue. Bright. He whispered, "They'll come inside, they always do." Mark held him close. "Then we don't let them." Outside, Cale stood before the cave. "Send in the extraction units." Two mechanical dogs, tall and sharp, raced inside with red lasers scanning every inch. Mark heard them coming. "Stay behind me," he whispered. The first dog appeared. Mark fired. Missed. The second lunged. Before Mark could fire again, Rin stepped forward. The glow in his eyes burst into flame, real flame. It surged out of him like a wave, filling the cave with golden fire. The mechanical dogs stopped moving. Their circuits smoked, their eyes dimmed. Silence. Mark stared at the boy, stunned. "Rin, what was that?" Rin looked down, shaking. "I didn't want to do it again." Mark put a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't hurt me. You protected us." Outside, Cale's voice crackled through a speaker. "That's the power we made him for. And that's the power we'll take back," Mark whispered. Not this time. The cave walls were still glowing faintly from Rin's burst of power. The mechanical dogs lay broken. Melted metal and cracked lenses scattered on the floor. But Mark knew that wasn't the end. Outside the cave, Cale and his soldiers were regrouping. More would come. Stronger. Smarter. Rin sat by the cave wall, breathing fast, hands shaking. The fire had left his eyes, but fear remained. "I didn't mean to hurt them," he said softly. Mark knelt beside him. "You didn't hurt anyone, Rin. You saved us. They'll come again." "I know," Mark said. "That's why we're not staying." Minutes later, Mark had packed everything they had left. Food, water packs, flare rounds, and the emergency sled. The nearest signal tower was 32 miles north, past frozen cliffs and broken bridges. Mark looked at Rin. "Can you ride the sled?" Rin nodded. "I'm not heavy." "That helps." Mark smiled. "We'll ride fast and quiet. Hold on tight." They slid down the first slope, the sled bouncing over ice. Wind whipped past them. Mark kept one hand on the steering rope, one hand on his rifle. Above them, drones zipped through the clouds, scanning, searching. "They're looking for my energy," Rin whispered. "That's how they find me." Mark thought for a second. Then he handed Rin a metal heat pack. "Hold this. Close, mask your body temp. Don't use your power unless you have to." Rin nodded. They reached the edge of an old bridge. It had once been a mining road, now half broken and covered in snow. Mark examined it. Half the path had collapsed into a deep ravine. What remained was narrow, icy, and dangerous. Rin looked down, at the hole. "It's too far." Mark looked around. "Not if we go one at a time." He placed Rin carefully on the sled. "Stay low. Don't move. I'll pull you across." "Promise you won't fall?" Mark smiled. "You fall, I jump, deal?" Rin gave a tiny smile. "Deal." Step by step, Mark pulled the sled across the frozen bridge. The wind picked up. Cracks formed under his boots. "Don't look down," he muttered. Rin stared at him. "It's okay if you're scared." Mark chuckled through his breath. "I'm always scared. I just don't let it stop me." Suddenly, a blast echoed in the sky. A drone fired a tracker bolt. It hit the side of the bridge. Boom! The ice cracked. "Rin!" screamed. Mark slipped but didn't let go. He dropped to his knees, held the rope tight, and growled, "Not today." The drone circled again. Mark pulled out his sidearm and fired blindly. Pop, pop, pop. The last shot hit. The drone burst into smoke and flame. They made it across, just barely. Mark collapsed beside the sled, breathing hard. Rin crawled next to him and whispered, "You didn't let go." "I told you," Mark said between gasps. "You're not alone anymore." Night fell as they reached a frozen cave near the northern ridge. Mark lit a small fire and wrapped Rin in blankets. Outside, in the dark skies, more ships moved. They weren't drones. These were transport carriers, big ones. Cale was getting serious. Mark stared at the fire. "He's bringing in the full team." "Then we have to hide again," Rin whispered. Mark shook his head. "No. We find the tower. We send a message to command. We tell them everything." "But what if they take me?" Mark looked him in the eyes. "Then I'll stand in front of you again and again. I don't care if it's Cale or 10 of him. You are not going back in a cage." Rin's eyes shimmered. He didn't cry. He just leaned into Mark's side and whispered, "You feel like a dad." Mark didn't answer for a while, then he said, "And you feel like someone I'd fight the world for." Outside the cave, Cale stepped from his ship. He looked at the drone footage. Mark, the child, the fire. He smiled coldly. "Let them run. Let them dream." He turned to his soldiers. "Tomorrow, we end this." The fire in the cave burned low. Mark added the last stick of wood and wrapped Rin tighter in the blanket. Outside, the wind howled, but inside it was warm. For now. Rin sat close to Mark. His eyes no longer glowed, but something inside him was building. He had been quiet since the escape. Too quiet. Mark didn't push him, not yet. Instead, he spoke gently. "We'll rest here for the night. First light, we find the tower." Rin looked at the fire, his voice low. "They'll find us before morning." Mark didn't answer, because deep down, he believed the same. An hour later, Rin spoke again. "Wasn't born like other kids." Mark looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I was made, in a tank, by them. They said I had a gift, but I couldn't control it." Mark listened. Rin continued. "The other kids, they disappeared one by one. I tried to be useful, I tried to follow orders." He paused. "Then I got scared. And it happened." "What happened?" "I caught fire," Rin whispered. "But the fire didn't burn me. It burned them." Mark's heart sank. "You didn't mean to, did you?" Rin shook his head, eyes shining with pain. "I just wanted them to stop hurting me." Mark put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That wasn't your fault." Suddenly, the wind outside changed. It didn't howl. It roared. Mark stood and stepped to the cave entrance. Flashing lights moved across the sky, 6 dropships, black, silent, surrounding the mountain. "We're out of time," he said. He ran to Rin and helped him up. "Can you move?" Rin stood. "Yes." Mark grabbed his gear, but the radar device on his belt beeped sharply. A red dot blinked. Too close. Then another. And another. They were already here. Mark raised his rifle. He looked at Rin. "Stay behind me no matter what." Rin's hands were shaking. "I don't want to go back." "You're not going anywhere without me." Then, the cave shook. Snow fell from the ceiling. A blast lit up the entrance. Cale's soldiers had found them. Mark fired. The first soldier dropped. But more poured in, armored, fast, without mercy. Rin backed away, his eyes wide. One soldier pointed a weapon at Mark. "No!" Rin screamed. The fire returned, but this time it wasn't a spark, it was a storm. The fire exploded from Rin's body, golden and alive. It didn't burn him. It danced with him, protecting him, roaring like a creature set free. Flames wrapped around the walls, circling the soldiers. Their weapons melted, their armor cracked. They screamed, not from heat, but from fear. Cale's voice came through a drone speaker. "Activate the collar, shut him down." Another soldier pulled out a silver device aimed at Rin's chest. Mark fired. The soldier dropped. Rin's eyes glowed brighter. He turned to Mark. Can I stop now? Mark lowered his rifle. Yes. Rin, you're safe. The flames dimmed. Ash floated through the air like snow. The soldiers were gone. Some ran. Some didn't move at all. The cave was quiet again. But Rin fell to his knees. Mark rushed to him. Rin! I'm okay, Rin whispered. Just tired. Mark held him close. You did it. You protected us. I didn't want to, Rin said weakly. But I couldn't let them take you. Mark smiled through the smoke. That makes two of us. High above, Kyle stood on his ship's deck, fists clenched. They bonded, he said. The fire answers him now. An officer beside him looked worried. Should we retreat? Kale turned slowly. No, we're going to erase them. Both of them. Back in the cave, Mark looked at the sky. The fire was over. For now. But the war, that was just beginning. The sun was rising. Pale gold light touched the frozen cliffs as Mark carried Rin across the ice. The boy was weak. His energy burned out after the firestorm in the cave. His head rested against Mark's chest, eyes half closed. Mark's arms shook, but he didn't stop. They had one chance left. The emergency signal tower stood at the top of the northern ridge, a black spire against the sky. If Mark could reach it and send the message, someone from command might hear. Maybe someone would come. He looked down at Rin. The boy's breathing was shallow but steady. We're almost there, Mark whispered. Stay with me. Behind them, Kale's fleet followed, dark ships cutting through the clouds like knives. Kale stood at the head of his command deck staring at the heat map. They're heading for the tower, his officer said. Kale smiled coldly. Then that's where they'll die. Mark reached the base of the tower. The door was frozen shut. He slammed his shoulder into it, once, twice. On the third hit, the metal creaked open. He stepped inside, placed Rin gently on a bench and ran to the control panel. Power cells, low, signal range, limited. But it would. Mark turned on the transmitter and spoke into the mic. This is Outpost Scout Mark Rylan. Imperial Bioforce Unit is tracking an unregistered child. Not a weapon, not a threat. He's alive. He deserves protection. If anyone hears this, please help. We're at Northern Tower Delta 7. He paused, then added softly, and if this is my last call, tell command I chose to be his father. Outside, Kale's troops landed. Dozens drones, mechs, walkers. Kale stepped out, dressed in black, his hand glowing with a control chip. I'll finish this myself. Mark stood in front of the tower, rifle raised. His hands were numb, but his eyes were clear. He wasn't running, not anymore. The snow trembled as Kyle approached with 5 soldiers. You're just a man, Kyle said. A mechanic with no rank, no orders, and no future. I don't need a future, Mark said, if he doesn't have one. Kyle raised his arm to send a command. Behind Mark, a soft voice cried out, No! The sky burst open. Fire spiraled from the tower's rooftop. Not wild. Not angry. Controlled. Rin stood on the tower's edge, eyes glowing, fire wrapping around his body like armor. He stepped forward, slow, calm, unafraid. Kyle's soldiers stopped moving. Drones froze in the air. The fire didn't attack. It surrounded. Mark, and only Mark, like a shield. Rin floated gently to the ground and took Mark's hand. I'm not yours, he said to Kale. I'm his. Kyle's control chip sparked, then melted. His soldiers backed away. The fire cracked the ice beneath his feet. Kyle fell to his knees. He's bonded. Mark looked at Rin, and Rin nodded. He had chosen, not to burn, but to belong. Hours later, a human rescue ship arrived. Command had heard the message. They brought food, blankets, and medics. Rin slept quietly in Mark's arms as the ship lifted into the sky. A medic looked at Mark. You sure you want to take responsibility for him? He's not normal. Mark smiled, eyes tired but proud. He's not a weapon. He's a child. He just needed someone to believe that. He looked down at the sleeping boy. I choose him. In the cold, frozen galaxy, where love was rare, and hope even rarer, a human didn't choose power. He chose fatherhood, and an abandoned child chose home.